All right, people. Jason, and I'll record. Right. All right, let's start with a praise to Manjushri. So I can't put it on the screen because I left the connectors at home, but I suppose that it's all right. Obeisance to Maguru and Protector Manjushri, who holds in his heart the scriptural text and bodies of the things of things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun unclouded by defilements or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with a patient love of a father for his only son. No creature is caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. Yours whose stronger thunder proclamation and rises stupor for delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, whose powerful sword of wisdom hews out suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you, Manjushri, whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed his 10 stages, achieving the highest perfection of a Bodhisattva, has been pure from the beginning. O Manjushri, O loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness and close in my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Refuge and bodhicitta. I'll go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly, and the accumulations that I collect by listening to the teachings, may attain the state of Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I'll go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations that I collect by listening to the teachings, may I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I'll go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations that I collect by listening to the teachings, may I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. All right, so happy winter solstice for everyone, although it was yesterday. So we're almost done. We have today, tomorrow, and that's about it.
Yeah, I didn't know if Geshe was going to finish the process today. I thought Geshe was going to finish them, and then he held off till tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, what day is today? Today is Tuesday. Okay, so we finish text tomorrow, and we might have a day or two of discussion and Q&A. So, so I dug out a couple of points with respect to the verses that we've covered today. Now, I was looking at different sources during the lunch break. Didn't come up with much to say on top of what Geshe said today, so we might finish early. Let's just see how we go. So we finished looking at a section of dedicating for the sake of the welfare of others. Just look at we're going to look again at the structure of chapter number 10. So the extensive explanation of the dedication began with dedicating for the welfare of others. So we've covered this section. In fact, we actually finished dedicating for the sake of others today, beginning with verse 48. And then we went on for dedicating for one's own welfare. As Geshe said, dedicating for one's own welfare, you can take it to be referring to Shantideva himself. He is dedicating it for the welfare of himself. And we can, of course, dedicate it for our own welfare. So, Geshe spoke today. First of all, we began with verse 48, a presentation of the dedication for the welfare of sentient beings in brief. So just looking at where it fits, dedicating for this welfare of sentient beings in higher realms. We spoke of dedicating so that they may be free from suffering. Then we spoke of dedicating so that they accomplish their desired aim. And that was a lot of discussion about dedicating for the sake of human beings, to attain a precious human rebirth with freedoms and richnesses, to encounter whatever they need to progress along the spiritual path. So we spoke about it in general. And today we're going to, and then we spoke about dedicating so that they have temporary endowments and pleasure, then dedicating for the sake of the ordained in particular. And today we began with the presentation of the dedication of the welfare of all sentient beings in brief. So it's nice to do it in brief in verse 48. So verse 48 said, may all sentient beings many times make offerings to all the Buddhas. Due to the infinite bliss of the Buddhas, may they always be endowed with happiness. So Geshe spoke about it today quite, I think, extensively in speaking about the meaning of doing it many times and making offerings motivated by bodhicitta and so forth. So the only thing that I thought of, an only additional point that I thought of at home was that in the making of offering, we normally speak about different types of offerings. So we have making offerings of material things. So of course, we can think of how to make offerings extensively, like Samanta Bhadrajit, clouds of emanated offerings, clouds of offerings, both mentally emanated and physically arranged. So we can do that. But there's also the most important bit of the offering is practicing in a way that occurs with instruction. So I thought that actually here, when we think of probably, I think, let's call it the ultimate offering, it is the offering of practice. So if we think about it in terms of the verse, may all sentient beings many times make offerings to the Buddhas. So when you think of many times, may sentient beings every day practice and take their practice as being an offerings to the Buddha. So of course, you can think about ourselves as being human beings in general. So we as human beings in general, we may be able to daily go for refuge, daily develop bodhicitta, daily gather ethics, daily practice generosity and so forth. And all of that would be perfect offerings to the Buddha. So may we be able to do it many times, not just to practice one day, but to do it every day from life after life after life, to continue to progress along the steps of the path of enlightenment. So that due to the infinite bliss of the Buddha, may they always be endowed with happiness. So I thought that it's particularly tailored to thinking of offering of one's practice, because if we practice, if we practice, or if sentient beings practice in a way that occurs with instructions, we will first of all cause Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to be pleased with us, and that will make them happy. And due to their happiness, also our happiness will increase. And you can say that, I think that we can think about it in terms of accumulating merit by making Buddhas happy, which contributes to your own happiness. But it's not only accumulating merit in this way, it's also our own practice of reducing our anger, attachment, and ignorance, finding the antidotes, and developing the antidote of wisdom will, at the end, result in our own happiness. We create our own causes for happiness. So altogether, when we add that bit of offering a practice, I think that it gives another oomph to this verse, right? So may all sentient beings many times make offerings of the practice to the Buddhas. Due to the infinite bliss of the Buddhas, may they always be endowed with happiness. Now, Khenpo Kumpel says in his presentation in page 428, may beings as numerous as the skies vast at all times make offerings, both material things and of the practice. So actually Khenpo Kumpel mentions that as well, to the Buddhas in the 10 directions. And thanks to the Buddha's blessings, may they attain the inconceivable endless bliss of stainless enlightened mind, and be forever filled with great happiness. Amen to that. So that's Soha, yeah. So that's verse 48. And then we began with dedicating for one's own welfare. So first of all, wishing for the temporary effects to be obtained. So Shantideva is making those wishes with respect to himself in verses 51 and then 52. But just as well, we can, I think Geshe said it himself, we can think of our, first of all, study of Shantideva's guide, but also a practice of the mind of enlightenment and the six perfections, dedicating that as well. So we have two verses in that section. Let's begin with verse 49. Am I right in there? I think that maybe I jumped the section. Just a second. Sorry. Before that, yeah, I jumped a section. So I should so before dedicating for one's own welfare, there was a section of dedicating for supramundane purposes. Sorry, I forgot that I put it on the screen. Sorry. All right. I missed out on this section, dedicating for supramundane purposes in verses 49 and 50. So dedicating so that the aims of the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas be accomplished and brought to completion. I think that I have nothing to add to that. Let's look at verse 49. May Bodhisattvas accomplish the welfare of migrating beings as intended. May sentient beings also acquire whatever the protectors intended. Khenpo Kumpa's commentary says, may all the great Bodhisattvas fulfill the higher intention for the sake of beings in exactly the way they wish, bringing beings to spiritual maturity and liberation. So to fulfill the highest intention for the sake of sentient beings is to lead them to the state of liberation, even more so to the state of enlightenment. May beings swiftly receive the assistance and unsurpassable bliss wished for them by the omniscient protectors of beings, the Buddhas and their heirs, the great Bodhisattvas. That's verse 49. Then verse 50 says, likewise, may solitary realizers as well as hearers be happy. Now, solitary realizers and hearers, as Geshe said, there are two classifications of hinayana practitioners. I mean, I think that I wanted to say a couple of things with respect to such hinayana practitioners. When you look at, I am wondering if you speak to a Theravada practitioner and you ask them, are you a hearer, are you a solitary realizer? I wonder if they will agree with that classification in general.
I mean, we would say they're hearers, the ones I know.
Yeah.
That could be either.
Yeah, there could be either. So hearers and solitary realizers, from our perspective, are two types of hinayana practitioners. Whether they speak about themselves in exactly the same way, I'm not sure, probably not. But here, Khenpo Kumpans gives some explanation of those two terms, and probably we can add some details with respect to that. So, Pratyeka Buddhas, or self-made Buddhas, we sometimes call them solitary realizers, and solitary realizer is, I think, an English interpretation of the term that is used in Tibetan. So in Tibetan, the term is self-made Buddhas, or Buddhas by their own power. So Pratyeka Buddhas gain their enlightenment through their own self-arisen wisdom, whereby they understand the profound truth of dependent arising. Shravakas, or hearers, receive teachings from the holy teachers and they then expound them to others. May all be endowed with happiness that occurs from suffering comes to an end. May they attain the great bliss of ultimate and perfect Buddhahood. So in the system of tenets, and we will get to look at tenets later on this year, when hearers and solitary realizers are explained, they're also not explained in great details. We often say that solitary realizers are those who, they might receive some teachings, but then they set off to practice by themselves, and on that basis, they attain the state of enlightenment. Or they attain the state of medium enlightenment, middling enlightenment, not great enlightenment, but their own enlightenment, which means they develop certain qualities and qualities of realizations and qualities of abandonment. They abandon afflictive obscurations and attain the state of liberation of a self-made Buddha, a solitary realizer. Then hearers are those who said to be more community-oriented practitioners. So they do things in groups or with the fellow practitioners, rather than solitary realizers setting off and accomplishing that state alone. They do that with listening to teachings together. And here it says also that they expand the teachings to others. So they attain the state of liberation in relation to others. So the interesting thing is that solitary realizers are said to be more, you can say, they have a greater accumulation than those that are hearers. I thought that kind of sometimes I think that's interesting that they're considered to be, I wouldn't say more advanced. I wouldn't say that they are more advanced, but it's they practice completely by themselves in isolation. Probably they have some contact with others, but in general, they are more kind of, they stick to themselves. Those that are hearers, they live in communities and also teach it to others. You might think that those that live in communities and they interact with others, they practice in relation to others, they teach to others, they accumulate a greater degree of merit. This is how I think about it. But then it says that solitary realizers actually have a greater accumulation.
You could say greater, well, from the wisdom side, maybe.
Yeah, from the wisdom side. I mean, part of it is said that I think that in some contexts, it is said that they practice maybe even for a greater duration. So if they practice for a greater duration, maybe in relation to that, they also have greater accumulation. But regardless, Catherine says at the end, I haven't read through the whole passages, but I just read through the last line. It says, solitary realizers scare me. I guess it's like a clowns. Solitary realizers are scary. All right. I cannot comprehend how anyone could realize on their own other than the Buddha. I think that probably you could say that it's Samuel Kate. All right. Hi, Kate. So I hope that you are not too terrified of solitary realizers. Anyway, I think that probably it's not that they do everything completely by themselves. They have to, I think, receive teachings from others, from masters. But I think that in terms of their orientation towards the practice, they prefer to live in isolation. So,
well,
no,
if I was thinking of like, what's her name, that Austrian
that Austrian Lamotara, the one that lives in Nepal.
Yeah. And so she had a few teachings, and then her teacher said, come to Nepal, and she got a couple of years under supervision or under instruction of the teacher, and then so she would figure all in this country. She had some instruction, but then she was like solo retreated for 20 plus whatever years.
So I will repeat what Shukila said in a minute, but I just wanted also to tie to Mila Repa, because she practiced what Mila Repa practiced.
Yes.
So I think that kind of it is a similar way of maybe a similar way of practicing, maybe to a certain degree. So Shukila is saying that there's that Austrian woman, Tara something, and she was here in Australia maybe a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and she was meditating in the caves of Mila Repa in Nepal for like 20 years. So she got some instructions from a teacher, and at some point he said, all right, it's time for you to go and to Mila Repa caves and practice there. So, so that's one way of doing that. But then when we think of Mila Repa himself, Mila Repa got instructions from Mappa, and then he just set off to retreat and attain the state of enlightenment, you can say, by himself. Now, it's different to solitary realizer, because solitary realizer and also Tara, solitary realizers are hinayana practitioners, and Tara and Mila Repa were Mahayana practitioners. I say that Catherine has changed the name to Samuel Kate. Maybe Sam Young Kate. Anyway, so Mila Repa and other people that practice in that area are Mahayana practitioners, where here we're speaking about solitary realizers being Theravada. But still, I think that in terms of one's inclination to practice or orientation to practice, there are those who decide to kind of set off and do it as a solitary thing. Although nowadays in that system of caves, I think that there is a community of practitioners that do, to a certain degree, interact with each other. So it's not exactly like Mila Repa, but definitely it's kind of more effort than my effort or many of the efforts that we have, that we take here in our community.
Or maybe the Buddha boy.
Or maybe the Buddha boy. Yeah. Whatever happened to the Buddha boy. Yeah. So anyway, here's and so to realize this. So Oli says these classifications are possibly later add-ons. In the sutras, it seems to usually say that many people listened to the Buddha and became instantly enlightened. I think that maybe there is a greater emphasis on this classification that correct in later on, but I think that also this classification of hearers and so to realize is found probably in sutras. I can't think at the top of my head now.
Like they are mentioned.
They are mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, but certainly Oli is right in saying that when you look at sutras, the term Shravakas is commonly used. And I think that when the term Shravaka is commonly used, I think that it not only includes all of Theravada, what we call Theravada or Hinayanis now, it is also possibly referred to Mahayanists that were there, but were just kind of students of the Buddha at the time, maybe. So anyway, those are hearers and sort of realizes in brief. So then we have, let's see, dedicating for one's own welfare. So wishing for the temporary effects to be obtained, verses 51 and 52. May I too, until I attend a very joyous ground, by the kindness of Manjughosha, always recollect my former lives and always receive ordination. Now, there are a couple of interesting points that Khenpo Kumpa makes in his commentary, and I wanted to read it because it gave me a chuckle. I think that some of you, maybe Oli, would be impressed by that. Anyway, so it says, in Khenpo Kumpa's presentation, here, so it's in page 429. Here, Shantideva formulates the wish that, protected from the kindness of his Idam deity, the noble Manjughosha, he might always, throughout the series of his life until he reaches perfect joy. So that's the first ground of realization, maintain the memory of his previous existences. So first of all, the very joyous, so here it says the very joyous ground. Yeah, the very joyous ground is the name of the first ground. So when Bodhisattvas attend the path of seeing, they attend the first ground. Each one of the grounds has its own particular name. Can't remember all the names in sequence, but the very joyous, stainless, radiant, illumination, and so forth. Sorry?
It's in the precious cup.
Yeah, it's in the precious garland, difficult to overcome. Different names for those different grants. The first one is called the very joyous. Now it says that here Shantideva formulates the wish that, protected by the kindness of his Idam deity, the noble Manjughosha, he might always, throughout the series of his life until he reaches perfect joy, the first ground of realization, maintain the memory of his previous lives. But such means he will have conviction in the truth of the karmic law and effect, and will never forget bodhicitta. So, sorry?
It's in entry into the middle way too.
Yeah, it's entry into the middle way, in the entry to the middle way too, yeah. So then, so here kind of so here in this translation, it says, may he always remember his existences, which you can understand, may he remember his past lives, and therefore also remember how karma works, find conviction in the working of karma and also in the development of bodhicitta. But I think that we can add to that Geshe-la's interpretation that not only past life, but also think and remember that there are future lifetimes. And if we remember our past lives, we'll also remember future lives. Actually, when Bodhisattvas attain the first ground, second ground, third ground, and so forth, they attain higher and higher qualities, and they multiply by 10. So so think about it in terms of, for example, the development of bodhicitta, the development of shamatha. When you develop shamatha, certain level of shamatha, you can have some recollections of previous lives. You can see previous lives. As you progress, as you ascend throughout the bodhisattva grounds, you have a better and better insight to past lives. But also through that, you also can see certain degrees of karmas. We say in general that only a Buddha is someone that knows all the ins and outs of karma, which, if we experience a result of happiness in this life, knowing that 100 lifetimes ago I performed this particular action that resulted in this life's experience of happiness, is a knowledge that is exclusive to Buddhas. But still, bodhisattvas develop greater and greater insight into the working of karma as they ascend the grounds. So here Shantideva says, may that come to pass. He prays that he might always embrace the perfect discipline of monastic ordination. So I thought that this is for you, Oli, because we had a discussion before. Well, we had a discussion before. Yeah. Oli was asking whether maybe seeking ordination, for us in our circumstances, it's harder nowadays than, it's harder for us to be monastics at this point in time. Maybe it's easier to practice as a layperson, like Mila Repa, Gampopa, and so forth. Anyway, so it says, he prays that he might always embrace the perfect discipline of monastic life. So this is where the line that got me. It says, whereas to be a householder is the basis of all faults that bring ruin in this and future lives. To go forth into homelessness is the ground and basis of all excellent qualities and benefits. So anyway, at home I had a chuckle, kind of thinking of bringing up this line in our context. So it is kind of the basis. So remaining a householder or a layperson is the basis of all faults, and also it brings ruin in this and future lives. Probably you can say not established or no pervasion. I would say not established. There is no pervasion here, but I think that from the point of view of taking up ordination and really committing yourself to the monastic discipline, ethical discipline, for monastic, definitely you would be abstaining from many negativities. If you don't commit yourself to ethical discipline, either as a monastic but also as a layperson, it's harder.
It doesn't matter in terms of ethical discipline. If you don't hold that, there's no point having it out.
Yeah. But then I brought up another source, the Lamborghini Chemo. So in the explanation of the perfection of ethical discipline in the Lamborghini Chemo in page, so that's the second volume, in page 150, the summary of that says, not to weaken and to increase steadily the mind of enlightenment, the basis of the Bodhisattva deeds, is the root of engaging in the deeds of ethical discipline and so forth. It is also the best way to desist from harming any living being. And then it says, aspire to practice the ethical discipline of those of high levels and train your mind in it. Sincerely learn right now what to adopt and what to cast aside, starting from the ethical discipline of a beginning Bodhisattva. In particular, each day frequently exercise the attitude of restraint with respect to what you know about deeds that are wrong by nature, such as the 10 non-virtues, and deeds which are wrong by prohibition, which means deeds which are wrong in relation to the vows that you have prescribed, misdeeds.
As Lama Tsongkhapa says there, like strive to attain the higher vows and paraphrasing, abide, live with that ethical conduct. Is that even though you might strive to have the higher vows, your circumstances might not be, so live as if, and many people have been given that instruction, live as if, but stay as a lay person. But even one gentleman who passed away last year and was, in his mind at least, preparing for ordination, not just his mind, And Geshe Stanton told him, I'd never heard him say this to anyone, or even anything remotely like it, to actually familiarize with the 36 novice vows, to familiarize with those and live according to that. And he did. He did.
I wonder if people at home can hear Chokila. I haven't connected the system today, so I'm wondering if you can hear her.
No.
Bad luck, I say.
Hi, Sandy.
Hi.
All right, so
I can hear. It's better hearing than me. Sorry.
all right. No, so I'll repeat it nonetheless. So Chukada said, and this is the point that I meant to bring up in relation to this, is when you train in ethical discipline, you do what you can do at the present, but you always aspire to hold higher levels of ethical discipline. So, and this is what Lama Tsongkhapa highlights here. Aspire to practice the ethical discipline of those at high levels, and then train your mind in it. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says, and Chukada brought up this point that when you do what you can do at the moment and you aspire to hold a high level of ethical discipline, even if you don't hold the vow, you can still train yourself in abstaining from what those of high level abstain from. So there was one person that passed away last year. Geshe sometimes advised him, I think, as he said, to... Sorry?
A year or so.
Yeah, a year or so before, to train in upholding the vow, without having the vow, but still to train the mind in holding the vow and to abstain from what needs to be abstained. So he at the end passed away without being able to take up the vow, but at least he got it. Yeah, so this is actually, it's a good training to take up. Of course, you might be thinking that I can train, if I can train my mind in it, I don't need to take the vow, so at least I'm keeping myself, I'm giving myself the option to sin every once in a while. Sin. But still it is said that, first of all, the basis for guarding ethical discipline is taking the vow, is taking a vow. And then if you abstain from a certain negative action, either that is negative by nature or it is a prescribed misdeed, while you have a vow and you abstain from the same action in not having the vow, the merit that you accumulate by having the vow in your continuum is so much greater than just abstaining from that action while not having the vow. The commitment that you make, at least when you think about it in terms of who you're making the commitment to, so you're making the commitments either in front of the preceptor, in front of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, in front of the deities of the mandala and so forth. Then in front of the commitment that you make, and also you're making a commitment often to other living beings, the merit that you accumulate is greater, and also the hardship that is involved with guarding a vow is also making the accumulation become greater. Anyway, I wanted to bring it up here because I think that obviously life as a monastic is not suited to everyone. I think that particularly if you already have a family, if you have a house, and things are complicated. It's not that things are easy. And also, if in your mind you feel that you're not ready for that, then you're not ready for that. That's about it. But still, it's good to make those aspirations. May I be able to do it in the future? When we take ordination, for example, if you do it in stages, then you think that currently what I can hold is the Rabjung level. May I be able in the future to be stable enough to hold a Getzel ordination? And you can think, may I be able even to hold a full ordination vow? May I get to the point in which I'll be ready for that? So in this way, when Shantideva says, may I always seek ordination, and may I always receive ordination, when we think about it in relation to ourselves, even if it might be for the time being, if we find ourselves to be a little bit squeamish with respect to thinking, may I become ordained in the future, even if it doesn't happen this year or next year, or maybe even in this life, it's still good to think, may I be able to train myself in higher level of ethical discipline. all good if not in the business of supporting the actual homeless rather than other universe. Yeah, I think that when we kind of, when we not only make such aspirations in general, kind of aspire for this magnificent thing to come to pass, but if there are things that we can do, if we can support those around us at an immediate level, then it's not that we're just making those empty prayers, but also we're taking action. I think that Geshe said it a few times. You can make those prayers, which might sound quite fanciful, but if you neglect those around you, you ignore those around you, then you're just saying empty words. So it's definitely something to take to heart. All right. So that's with respect to seeking ordination. So it then says, in the present age, if one takes and observes just one of the precepts of the Buddha's teachings, one will acquire great merit and benefits. I mean, it always interests me to read those books of Tibetan masters, particularly those that were written a few centuries ago. So this is not too old. I think that this is probably a century or two ago, probably a couple of centuries. Lama Tsongkhapa's writings are like 700 years ago, let's say. And they already speak about their time as time of degeneration, in which if you keep even one bit of ethical discipline, then the merit that you accrue from that is humongous. So if they spoke about it in Tibetan environment, which was so religious and so devout, and I think that comparing to our environment was probably more virtuous, more in line with the Dhamma, all the day-to-day activities were tailored and centered around the Dhamma. If they speak about it as getting even one bit of ethical discipline is so meritorious, you can say that even more so at our time. So when you have more problems, more difficulties in guarding ethical discipline, I think that for us, it's to some degree is harder. We don't come from that background. There are so many things that are running up against us in trying to get our attention. We come from a non-Buddhist background, so it's harder. So even in our time, if we keep just one bit of ethical discipline, that's truly indeed amazing. So then it says, this has been described in this Samadhi Raja Sutra. So the Sutra, the King of Concentration Sutra. Those who for many eons, trillionfold, as grains upon the Ganges sandy shore, worship with devout mind, with food and drink, and lamps and flowers, parasols and banners, 1,000 million Buddhas all are in the merits utterly surpassed by those who at this time, when sacred Dhamma perishes and when the teaching of the Tathagata wanes, will practice day and night a single precept, right? So this is what Tibetans say, if at this point in time we practice ethical discipline and we do it at least one single precept, the merit from that is much greater than making all those amazing offerings. So this being so, there is no need to speak of the result that will occur when one embraces monastic ordination and observes all precepts without impairment. One will accomplish perfectly the goals of this and future existences, both for oneself and others. The benefits that ensue are inconceivable. So as I said, when we think about currently about our ability, it's all right to say that I'm not ready for that, right? So it's not to say that you cannot practice without seeking ordination, but at least it's good to then keep those aspirations at the back of my mind. May I be able to uphold high level of ethical discipline. So that was verse 51. Then we have verse 52. May I be robust. Even though the food may be simple and live, in all my life may I find ideal isolated places. So here we can think of making aspirations for perfect conditions for our personal practice. And this is what Shantideva is saying here personally. May I find perfect situation for practice, not only externally, but it seems that also mentally. Even though the food may be simple, may I be able to live, may I be robust to deal with that, and may I find ideal isolated places. So we spoke previously briefly about isolated places of cultivating physical and mental isolation. We spoke about the five or six conducive conditions for cultivating shamatha, having suitable place, in terms of access to food and not a place that breed. Yeah. No snakes, no echidnas, no drop bears. Yeah, echidnas are cute. No platypus. Those vicious platypus. Anyway, so Kempo Kumba says, Shantideva prays that may he have a healthy body and live happily, sustained by no more than alms, ordinary simple fare. And he prays that in every life until he attains Buddhahood, he might have a proper dwelling place suitable for the practice of virtue, in the utter, inner, and secret solitude of his body, speech, and mind, the need for which has already been explained. So I thought about it at home in terms of wishing for places of seclusion or isolation for the future, so that we might be able to use our body, speech, and mind for them. And I thought that, at least in my mind, sometimes I think that there is a certain contradiction to those wishes, because I think that it's often because of attachment to possession and to the riches and enjoyments of this life. Sometimes we think that if I cultivate enough virtue and merit, if I practice charity and so forth, I would have all these resources in the future. I will have abundance in all those nice resources in the future. Of course, I'll be able to use them for the sake of practice and for the sake of practice, for the sake of helping others. I thought it's just interesting here to think of what Shantideva is saying. May I live a simple life? Yeah, I'm practicing generosity, practicing ethics, patience, and so forth. They contribute to good features in future lifetime, but I still want to live a simple life. In some sense, you can say, maybe for me, I can think maybe more simple than this life. May I be able to live a life that is more simple than this life, be able to content with a house that is simple, with a phone that is simple, with a
enjoy Sampa.
Enjoy Sampa, yeah. I'm not sure about that. But actually, may I be able to enjoy it? Yeah, maybe that's the point. May I be able to enjoy Sampa and not get like... So Shantideva prays that he may have a healthy body and live happily, sustained by no more than alms, ordinary simple fare. So I think that it goes with making aspirations for highest levels of ethical discipline, which are supposed to put a stop to coarser level of afflictions, to attachment, desire, and so forth. May I be able to do that? And he prays that in every life until he attains Buddhahood, he may have a proper dwelling place suitable for the practice of virtue, in the outer, inner, and secret solitude of his body, speech, and mind, and the need for which has already been explained. I think that it's kind of quite interesting. If you think of, man, in this life, may I not get such good conditions or comfortable conditions that I have in this life. May it be just simple. May I get some teachings and live in a cave?
It's not necessarily to live in a cave. I think it's not to be attached to having all those things, like whether you've got them or not. But,
so it's not necessarily aspiring to live in a cave, but aspiring not to be attached to them. When I say may I live in a cave, it says in a sense that may I at least not find it intimidating. May I be able to be happy and satisfied by living in simple conditions, and to focus on the development of my qualities of body, speech, and mind. So regarding the benefits of solitude, these once again are as mentioned in Chandra Pradita Sutra, the lamp of the moonlight sutra. It is of greater benefit to make 7 steps in the direction of a solitary retreat than to make offerings to the Buddhas of the 10 directions for as many kalpas as there are on the grains of sand in the Ganges. So then one last note about this section. It says the commentarial tradition speaks of the Master Shantideva as a noble being, an Arya. So here Shantideva is making this aspiration, may I attend the first ground. But here it says that the commentaries already regarded Shantideva as being an Arya being, someone that has attained the first ground, because they call him the great Bodhisattva Shantideva. So consequently, the verse, until through Madhugosha's perfect kindness, I attain the ground of perfect joy, the very joyous ground. which is the first level of realization, does not express his own condition, is directed at his followers training on the path. So here the commentary to Shantideva's text says that although Shantideva is aspiring to attain the first ground, the commentary says that actually he's already attained the first ground. So this, rather than aiming at itself, is aiming at others. So which means that is creating this possibility for us to make such aspirations. May we also attain the first ground. Anyway, those are the points I came up with today, because I think that the rest of the verses were quite, I think, straightforward. So whenever I desire to look, or even if I wish to ask the slightest question, that's verse 53. May I behold without any hindrance to protect Manjughosha himself, in order to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings who extend to the end of space in the 10 directions. May my deeds also be just like the deeds of Manjughosha. So here in the commentary, it says that Manjughosha was the closest deity to Shantideva. So he says that there are also other bodhisattvas. In his commentary to verse 54, he says, in order to accomplish easily the immediate and ultimate goals of beings dwelling in all the world systems that lie in the 10 directions, and wherever space is to be found, he prays that his every deed should reflect and perfect exploits of the inconceivable emanations of Manjushri's body, speech, and mind, a great flood of bodhisattva activities for the benefit of others. In brief, he says, may I be able to practice and behave just like the great 8 close sons of the Buddha, which are Manjushri in his wisdom, Avalokiteshvara in his love, Vajrapana is in power, Samantabhadra in his enlightened activities, and so forth. So, sorry? Yeah, so I think that it also accords with Samantabhadra's king of prayers. So in Samanta kings of prayers, those verses, I think maybe towards the end, in which we wish to perform those great deeds like Manjushri and Samantabhadra and all other bodhisattvas to act for the sake of sentient beings that extend to the reaches of space in the 10 directions. For this purpose, that we too should sincerely dedicate all the roots of our virtue and make prayers of good wishes. Then, for as long as space endures and for as long as sentient beings remain, for that long may I abide and eliminate the suffering of migrating beings. The commentary says, and now for as long as space endures, for as long as there are sentient beings to be found, Shantideva prays that as one who works for the welfare of others, he may continue to remain in order to drive away the sorrows of the world. May the sufferings of migrated beings, no matter how many they are, all ripen upon me. Due to the Bodhisattva Sangha, may migrated beings enjoy happiness. So again, I think that this is, you can say, indicating the practice of taking and giving. May the suffering of migrating beings, no matter how many they are, all ripen upon me. Due to the Bodhisattva Sangha, may migrated beings enjoy happiness, giving happiness to other living beings. He prays that all the pains and sorrows of wandering beings should ripen wholly on himself and thus be purified. And thanks to the power of bodhicitta, the twofold accumulation and the praise of aspiration of the company of bodhisattvas, he prays that the infinite multitude of beings might enjoy the perfection of happiness both in the immediate and ultimate terms. All right, any questions? All right, if we have no questions, we might leave it here for now, 10 minutes earlier, but I think that I ran out of points. All right, let's leave it here for now. Due to this virtue, I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all transmigratory beings without exception to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhicitta not yet born arise. may that arisen not incline, but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and joy. All powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You uphold the subduer's moral way, which serves in the bountiful burrow of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Arjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Protect of myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long. Thank you. Apologies for speaking too fast.
Someone saying you spoke too fast.
A few days ago.
Oh, yes, when you were doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird. Heart sutra.
Supersonic. I probably had coffee before.
No, but what was weird?